Hello everyone, welcome to Ediora. I'm Manaal, your verbal faculty, and in this session, we will be studying grammar. We'll be covering a lot of concepts about basic grammar and advanced grammar. Now, most of you must have studied basic grammar in school, all the way up till your 10th standard or even 12th if you were in CBSE or ICSE. But the thing is that most of us don't remember the basic grammar that we studied in school when we move on in life. Through college, through professional courses, through our jobs, we forget the basic grammar rules. We forget how to identify subjects from predicates, independent and dependent clauses, transitive and intransitive verbs, direct and indirect objects. Most of you out there, I'm sure, might not even be able to identify the difference between a noun and a verb. And that's absolutely fine, because when studying grammar in school, it was done solely for the purpose of getting marks. The case here is not much different. Even in the CA exam, you will be studying grammar in this chapter just to get your marks. But hopefully, your adult brains will be better skilled to remember the rules now for a much longer time than you did in school. So let's start with the most basic grammar question. What is a sentence? A sentence is anything that makes perfect sense. Anything in the English language that you can say that makes sense on its own without giving you extra context. For example, my second brother lives in US. My mother works at the British Council Library. The doctors at this hospital are adept in neurosurgery. All of these are complete sentences. There is no way that you will hear any of these sentences and think that they sound incomplete, that they're not making sense, that there's something amiss. That is a complete sentence. Anything that sounds right and makes sense. Now we need to understand the parts of a sentence. Let's start with subjects and objects. What is a subject in a sentence? A subject is the doer of the action. Any person, and not just person, even a non-living thing, the entity that is performing the main action in the sentence becomes your subject. So when I say, my second brother lives in the US, who is the subject in that sentence? It's my second brother. Because my brother is the one performing the action of living in a particular country. When I say my mother works at the British Council Library, the subject is my mother, because she is the one performing the action of working at a certain place. Any person, any entity, it's not necessary that it has to be a living thing, not necessarily a human being. It can be an animal, it can be a plant, it can be a non-living thing. As long as it's performing an action, the main action in the sentence, it becomes your subject. Now you're going to ask me, how can a non-living thing perform an action? So let's take an example. The clouds crashed very loudly in the sky. Now what's happening here? The clouds are the subject. They're non-living. You can't look up at the clouds and start having a conversation with them. If you do, you probably have schizophrenia or some other mental illness. Clouds are non-living things, but they can definitely perform the action of crashing in the sky to create the thundering effect, to create rain. So it's absolutely fine to call the clouds the subject even though they're non-living. Let's take another sentence. The trees shed their leaves in autumn. The subject in the sentence is trees. Trees are living things, but they're not humans. but they're still performing the action of shedding their trees during autumn. There's nobody else in the sentence who could perform the action of shedding. So trees is your subject. Now let's talk about objects. Objects are the receivers of the action. They are the ones who bear the brunt of the actions performed in the sentence. So when I say, let's go back to the original sentence, the very first sentence we took. When I say, my second brother lives in the United States. What is the object in this sentence? The object is United States. Because where is the action of living taking place? It's taking place in US. So US automatically becomes the object or the receiver of the action. My brother is not just living. He's living in a particular place, in a specific place. That place has to deal with all of his living scenarios. Him breathing and taking in the oxygen of the place, breathing out carbon dioxide, utilizing the resources of the place, the wear and tear, all of that, all of the brunt of his very action of living is borne by that particular place. So that place becomes the object. When I say my mother works at the British Council Library, the British Council Library becomes my object. Because that library is bearing the brunt or reaping the benefits of my mother's work. Whatever work my mother is doing, she is doing it at the library. So an object very simply is anything that receives the action. Now it doesn't necessarily have to be a place. It doesn't necessarily again have to be a living thing. It can be non-living. It can be literally anything in the world. For example, if I said, I kicked the desk. I am the subject in the sentence because I perform the action of kicking. What am I kicking? I'm kicking the desk. So the desk is receiving my kick. If this was Toy Story and the desk could actually talk, then the desk would feel the hurt or the pain of my kick. So the desk becomes my object. Just because the desk can't express that it's feeling the pain of your kick does not mean that it doesn't become the receiver of your object. If I replace the word desk and put a living thing, I say, I kicked my little sister. My sister is still receiving the same action. But now because my sister can say ouch and can go complaining to my mom, she automatically becomes a very viable object in your head. But that's not how you use logic in grammar. The idea here is that your subjects and objects can be living and non-living things. They can be breathing or non-breathing things. They can even be ideas and abstract words. That's also absolutely fine. Take a sentence. My idea brought multiple revenues to the company. My idea brought multiple revenues to the company. The subject here is my idea. Because my idea is performing the action of bringing revenues. And who is it bringing revenues for? To the company. So the company becomes the object or the receiver of the action of revenues. Now my idea is abstract. The idea is in my head. You cannot see it. It's intangible. So I'm not even talking about living and non-living. I'm going on a whole different level here. I'm talking about something that does not have physical form and exists only in my head. And still, that thing can perform an action that can be received by a certain company. So you get the gist here. A subject and an object can be literally anything in the world. The only rule you need to remember here is doer of action and receiver of action. That's it. Now another thing. Subjects and objects in a sentence are always nouns. Write that down. For those of you who don't know how to identify nouns in a sentence, we will discuss that a little later in this chapter itself, where we'll talk about the different parts of speech. But just write down the rule: subjects and objects are always nouns. They cannot be any other parts of speech. Now, coming back to a sentence. The rule still applies. A sentence is anything that makes sense. But another technical way to identify a sentence is to find out the subject and the verb in a sentence. The technical grammar rule of a sentence is anything that has a subject and a verb combination. Your verb is just your action. If I have the subject is performing a certain action, the action has to be there. It doesn't matter if the object is not there. Objects are optional in a sentence, but subjects and verbs need to compulsorily be there to be characterized as a full sentence. Now, why am I giving you the technical definition? Because the layman's definition was anything that makes sense. This rule will work for people who are good at English grammar, who have been speaking in English since childhood and correct English. Not the slang, not the chalao type of words that we usually use in India because nobody's really going to correct us as much. For people who know strict English, they will be able to make sense from the sentence. They'll be able to recognize a grammatically sound sentence from an ungrammatical sentence. But for those of you whose English is not very strong, there is a good chance that your judgment of what is making sense might be a little off. A particular sentence might sound right to you, but it still may have grammatical errors. So for those of you whose grammar is not very strong, casual grammar or casual English is not very strong, applying the technical grammar rule will always get you through. And the technical grammar rule is subject and verb. Both of these need to be there to make a sentence complete. Let's take an example to differentiate here. He has a chain of gold. He is the subject. He is performing the action of having something. Has is your verb. He is performing the action of having something. Now, what does he have? He has a chain of gold. So, chain of gold becomes my object. This sentence has all three entities: subject, verb, and object. But let's look at a sentence that only has subject and verb. What if I say, I am eating? That's it. I am the subject. And what is the action I'm performing? Eating. There's no object. I am eating, full stop. This sentence still makes perfect sense. I can extend this sentence. I can say, I am eating an apple. If I extend and I put the word apple there, then apple will become my object. What am I eating? An apple. Apple is the receiver of my action of eating. But even if I don't put the object, even if I don't mention apple, the original sentence still makes perfect grammatical sense. I am eating, full stop. So you realize that just having a subject and a verb alone in the sentence is more than enough. Just 3 words and my sentence is complete. Now let's move on and understand a little bit about independent and dependent sentences. Actually, it is said independent and dependent clauses, but you don't need to get confused with that. Clauses is just a fancy word for sentence. So in English, in school you must have studied independent clause and dependent clause, or main clause and subordinate clause. You must have done that in school and it must have sounded really daunting, especially those of you who did not like language subjects. But it's actually not at all daunting. It's not at all scary. Just replace the word clause with sentence. An independent clause is nothing but an independent sentence. Dependent clause is nothing but a dependent sentence. So now let's understand the difference between independent and dependent. It's literally as the definition gives you. An independent sentence or clause is a sentence which will make complete sense on its own. Like all of the examples I have given you up till now, they are all independent sentences because they can stand alone. They make perfect sense. A dependent sentence or a dependent clause is one which does not make sense on its own. It has to be attached to another independent sentence to make sense. It just does not give you context. Let's take simple basic examples to understand this difference. An example of an independent clause would be, this is the place where the accident happened. The sentence makes perfect sense on its own, right? Don't try to identify subjects, verbs, and objects in it right now. The identification part takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of practice, so you can do that in your free time. Right now, just understand the basics. This is the place where the accident happened is independent. Why? Because it makes complete sense as a sentence. You're not confused. You don't need more context to understand the sentence. You may have follow-up questions like what accident, how did it happen, blah, blah, blah. But those are just follow-ups. In order to understand this sentence, you don't need any extra information. Now, what is a dependent clause? Let's break down this sentence only. Look at the second part of the sentence. Where the accident happened. If I break this sentence and I just look at the second part, does it make sense on its own? If I just say where the accident happened, does it make sense? No. Independently or on its own, that sentence does not sound grammatically right because that is dependent. What is it dependent on? It's dependent on the first part of the sentence. The first part says, this is the place. When you connect both of them together, only then does the entire thing make sense. The first part can make sense on its own. This is the place. Full stop. It can make sense on its own. But the second part does not make sense on its own. So the second part of the sentence is dependent. The first part is independent. And the second part needs the first part of the sentence to make complete sense. That's the difference between independent and dependent clauses. As simple as that. So whenever you read a sentence, if on its own it makes sense, it's independent. If it does not make sense on its own, it's dependent. Now that you understand this, it's a good time to introduce phrases. Since this chapter, we started off with talking about phrases and clauses. Now we've understood what are clauses. Clauses are nothing but sentences. Sentences can be independent and dependent. Now let's talk about phrases. A phrase is just a group of words that again alone will not make sense. It has to be a part of a larger sentence because alone it cannot stand. A phrase is just a group of words. And phrases, why are they not clauses? Why are they not sentences? Because they break the most basic grammatical rule of sentences. The basic grammar rule of a sentence is subject plus verb combination. Phrases will not have subject plus verb combination. They may have a subject alone. They may have a verb alone. But they will not have both together. And because they break the very basic rule of a sentence, they are not categorized as sentences anymore. Some popular examples of phrases are flying in the wind, wet in the sand, dirty with mud. What is happening in these sentences? Flying is the action, right? Flying, it's a particular action. In the wind could be your object, the place where the flying or the action is happening. But who's flying? It's not a complete sentence, right? How will I make this complete? By putting the subject. I could say my scarf is flying in the wind. Then my scarf becomes the subject because that's performing the action of flying. But because the scarf word is not mentioned, because the subject is not mentioned, flying in the wind on its own is not a complete sentence, so that becomes a phrase. Wet in the sand. Wet is an action, being wet. Where are you wet? In the sand. But who's wet? Are my feet wet in the sand? Is my sandcastle wet in the sand? Are my toys wet in the sand? I have absolutely no idea. The subject is missing, and so it's not a sentence, it is a phrase. So you get the gist. A phrase is just a group of words. They can be part of a larger sentence, but on their own they cannot stand. Now that we understand the difference between phrases and clauses, we're going to go a little more deeper. Sometime later in this chapter, we're going to discuss the types of sentences. We're going to discuss the types of phrases. And that is really, really advanced grammar. But before we get to that, we are just going to do a quick brush up of parts of speech. Because as I said, that identifying the different parts of a sentence, not just subject, verbs, and objects, but even the other parts. A sentence has a lot of parts of speech. So identifying or understanding each of them is important, not just from your exam point of view, but also to understand advanced grammar that we'll be taking up later in this chapter. So let's quickly get on to what are the different parts of a sentence or different parts of speech. Let's talk about the different parts of speech in a sentence, or how to identify and categorize the different parts of a sentence. Let's take this basic sentence for example. The cat quickly ate the rat that was sitting on the table. You can write down the sentence if you want. The cat quickly ate the rat that was sitting on the table. Now let's take each word of this sentence and identify what part of speech does it come under. Let's start with the. The is an article. Words such as a, an, and the, they're all articles. There's no specific definition for articles. You really don't need to know the definition either because it won't come in the exam. All you need to know is that these three words, a, an, and the, they are defined as articles. That's it. Now let's look at the next word, cat. The cat is our subject. Why is it our subject? Because it's performing the action, right? The cat is the one who is performing the action of eating something. So eating becomes my verb or my action. Ate is my verb. Now, what about quickly? We left that word. Quickly is what we call an adverb. Why? Because it's describing ate. How did the cat eat? Quickly. Instead of quickly, you could have had any word. As long as it's describing the verb, it becomes an adverb. So I could say, the cat quietly ate the rat. Or the cat slowly ate the rat. Or the cat begrudgingly ate the rat. Any kind of word, as long as it's describing a verb, automatically becomes your adverb. After ate, we again have the article the. Then we have rat. Now what is rat? Rat is the recipient of this action, right? Rat, the poor one, is the one who is being eaten. So rat becomes my object. Now what is the word that doing? So let's stop here and let's say I put a full stop after the word rat. The minute I put a full stop after rat, I'm trying to tell you that that is one sentence. Is that a sentence? Is it making perfect sense? It is. The cat quickly ate the rat. That sentence makes absolute sense. So that part is an independent clause. You can call it an IC or an independent clause because it makes sense on its own. Look at the next part. That was sitting on the table. If I just read this much, would it make perfect grammatical sense? It wouldn't. If I just walked up to you and said that was sitting on the table, you'll be like, what was sitting on the table? What is the that referring to? You have no idea. The second part does not make sense on its own, which is why it's not an independent clause, it's a dependent clause. In order for the second part to exist, the first part is needed. The first part does not need the second to exist. So first is independent, second is dependent. Now let's look at the parts of speech in the dependent clause. Whenever we have a dependent clause or a subordinate clause, we'll usually have a word in the middle which will connect it. Basically, it's a connecting word, a word which connects your independent and your dependent clause. That word is the word that. And that is a relative pronoun. Now, you don't really need to know what are relative pronouns. All you need to understand is relative pronouns are words that connect independent and dependent clauses. They basically connect clauses. That's it. So that is a pronoun. After that, I have the word was. Was is again a verb. Sitting. What is sitting? Sitting is also a verb. Both of them are verb because both are actions. And on the table. On the table is, you can say that on is a preposition. The is once again an article and table is a noun. You should know how to identify these basic parts of speech because without them, identifying independent and dependent clauses will become extremely important. Okay? Now, let's talk a little more about subjects, objects, and nouns. I discussed this right at the beginning, that subjects and objects are always nouns. But all nouns are not subjects or objects. So subjects and objects will always be a noun, but all nouns will not be a subject or an object. This example is a good one to take. The last word in this example is the word table. Table is a noun, but it is neither your subject nor your object. Right? It's just there in the sentence. It's giving you extra information. But it is neither the subject nor the object. But on the other hand, if you look at the subject and object in the sentence, if you look at cat and rat, both of them are nouns. Right? So all nouns cannot be S or O, subject/object, but all S and O's will always be nouns. This is a hard and fast rule of grammar. There are no variables in this, so you should not get confused. What are nouns? Nouns are what you learnt in school. Name, place, animal, thing. Proper nouns, names of people, names of places, etc. Places, any kind of place, US, India, and not just countries or cities, not just proper noun places, but literally any place. The garden, the library, these are all places, right? Name, place, animal, and thing. Animals. And when I say animals, I also mean plants in that, animals/plants. And things, any kind of thing in the world. Chairs, tables, all of them are nouns. So you have your nouns, you have your subjects, you have your objects. Now under objects, we can further bifurcate them into direct object and indirect object. This is a very basic concept, the difference between direct object and indirect object. Let's take the sentence. Now what is the difference between direct and indirect objects? We can understand this basic concept through a simple example. Look at this sentence. The surgeon operated on the patient with unclean equipments. He's obviously a bad surgeon. He should have sanitized all of the equipments before operating, but he didn't. This is a perfect sentence. The subject in the sentence is surgeon. He performed the action of operating. So operated is your verb. Now, who's the object? The direct object means the direct recipient of the operation is the patient. The patient was the one being operated, so that's the direct object. The indirect object is equipments. What did the surgeon use for operation? Unclean equipments. So there are two objects in this sentence, patient and equipments. Patient is direct. and equipments is indirect. So sometimes a certain subject that's performing an action can direct the action towards two objects. Or in other words, two objects can be recipients of the same action. In such a case, the more important object or the primary one will become your direct object and the less important one will become your indirect object. How do I know patient is important and equipment is less important? They're both they're both important. It's just that in terms of percentage, I can say that patient is on a slightly higher percentage of importance than equipment. How do I know that? It's very simple. If I tell you the surgeon operated, what's the first question that will come to your mind? Would your first question be with what kind of equipment, or would your first question be on whom? It's going to be on whom, right? If I told you that the surgeon operated, your first follow-up question will be on whom did he operate? And the answer will be patient. Then the second follow-up question could be with what kind of equipment, or where, or how. And if one of those questions is getting answered, then that becomes your indirect object. So the way to know direct versus indirect is which is the first primary follow-up question that you would ask. That would become your direct object. Let's take another example. My mom cooked a cake in the new microwave. My mom is the subject. She's performing the action of cooking. Now, what is the first question that you're going to ask here? If I told you my mom cooked, your first question will be, what did she cook? You're not going to ask, how did she cook? Where did she cook? What did she use for cooking? No. Your first question would be, what was the dish? That's what you want to know. And the dish is cake. So cake becomes my direct object. The indirect object is the new microwave because I can ask a second follow-up question. How did she cook the cake? Or what did she use to make the cake? And to that I can respond, she used the new microwave. So the microwave becomes my indirect object. It's as simple as that. Direct and indirect object are supremely easy concepts. What's harder is to wrap your head around the idea of subject-verb objects and direct and indirect clauses. These are the tough parts. Identifying the other parts of speech and breaking down direct versus indirect is much, much easier. Now that we're clear on nouns, subjects, and objects, let's talk about verbs. Because verbs are an integral part of a sentence. If you remember the core definition, a sentence is subject plus verb combination. So knowing how to identify verbs in a sentence is also very important. In the simplest form, verbs are doing words. They are actions. Anything that shows an action in a sentence is your verb. In most cases, identifying actions or verbs in a sentence is easier than identifying subjects or objects. Which is why I always tell my students that whenever you are confused, you're not sure if it's an independent or a dependent clause, you're not sure if it is even a complete sentence. And in order to determine that, you need to figure out subjects, verbs. But you're confused because you don't know which is the subject, which is the object, which is quite possible. And in such a case, identifying the verbs will always make your work easy. Find out what is the action. That's all. The minute you get your action, ask yourself who is performing the action. That becomes your subject. Then ask yourself who's receiving the action. That becomes your object. Identifying verbs are easier, so the first step in a difficult sentence is to try and figure out what is the verb or the action. Now there are different types of verbs, but verbs can mainly be categorized into two parts: main verb and helping verb. Your main verb is the actual action in the sentence. For example, teaching, sitting, eating, sleeping, running. These are your actual actions. These are called main verbs. Helping verbs are the words that you put before your main verb in order to show the tense or the plurality. For example, if I say, he is singing. Singing is the actual action in the sentence. So that is my main verb. My helping verb is the word is. Is coming before the main verb, and what is it doing? It is showing two things. Number one, it is showing the tense. Is present tense. And the second thing it is doing is showing plurality. Is singular. If I change the word is to was, what happens? The sentence becomes past tense. He was singing. The main verb is still the same, singing. But now I've changed my helping verb, and just by changing the helping verb, I've changed the tense from present to past. Instead of was, let's say I write, they are singing. Now what is the are doing? Are is also a helping verb, but it is showing plurality. Instead of one person singing, now there are multiple people singing. That's what your helping verbs do. They will help you change the tense. They will help you change from singular to plural, plural to singular. There are only a few helping verbs in the English language. Main verbs are uncountable. There are so many main verbs. Because there are so many actions, right? You could be literally performing thousands of actions in the world, right? Sleeping, teaching, dancing, eating, playing, watching, studying. There are so many actions. So main verbs are infinite. But your helping verbs are very limited. So which are your helping verbs? You have the words am, is, are, was, were, has, have, had, does, do, and did. 11. There are only 11 helping words. All of these verbs in some way or the other will either change the tense or the plurality. So I hope I'm clear on main verbs and helping verbs. Helping verbs may also be called auxiliary verbs. That's just a fancier name for it because your textbook says auxiliary, but you don't need to get confused. A lot of times people whose English is not very advanced, when they read these fancy words, they get intimidated. As I said, clauses is nothing but a fancy word for sentence. Auxiliary is nothing but a fancy word for helping. Subordinate clause is nothing but a fancy word for dependent sentence. Okay? So dumb it down a little, it will feel less intimidating, that's all. Now let's talk about modals. Modals are words which also come before your main verb, but their purpose is completely different. They are used to show some sort of permission or advice or order or possibility. For example, I may attend the event tomorrow. Attend is my main verb. It's my main action. The word may, which is coming before attend, is a modal. It is showing possibility. I may attend. I'm not sure, but I may. If I change the word may and I put will, then it shows some sort of guarantee. Then it says that I am definitely sure I'm going to attend it. Unless some unforeseeable, imminent event actually happens, I am definitely going to attend it. What if I change will and put can? I can or I could attend the event tomorrow. That shows ability. Ability means I have the availability, I have the freedom to attend. Whether I will or whether I won't is not something I'm going to tell you right now. But I do have the capability of attending the event. I can if I want to. What if I change the can to should? I should attend the event tomorrow. Now it has become an advice. An advice I'm giving myself. I should attend it tomorrow. It might be better for me. It might be a good thing. I should sleep early. I should study for the test. These are all advice that I'm giving myself. I could give advice to someone else also. The doctor says you should go out in the sun more often. Probably have a vitamin D deficiency. You should go out in the sun more often. It's giving you an advice, a recommendation. Instead of should, what if I write must? I must go to the event tomorrow. Now that shows order. Must is a compulsion. It's an order given to somebody. I'm giving myself the order. I must do this. Otherwise bad things will happen. You must not break the rules. Otherwise you'll be punished. So here it's an order. So you see how when I change the words, I am actually changing the tone or the meaning of the sentence. Just one word. I can attend the event tomorrow. I may attend the event tomorrow. I should attend the event tomorrow. I will attend the event tomorrow. I must attend the event tomorrow. All words remain the same. My main verb or my action is still the word attend. What I'm doing is I'm changing the modal right before it, and by changing that, I'm changing the tone from possibility to compulsion to recommendation to capability, anything. That's what modals do. Now that you're clear on these three main verbs, helping/auxiliary verbs and modals, let's talk about something a little more complicated. Participles and gerunds. These are as intimidating as they sound. There is no way to sugarcoat these. Sometimes some verbs, and I'm talking about main verbs specifically, main verbs or actions, they also perform other functions in a sentence. Sometimes a verb may not be a verb. It may perform the function of other parts of speech. So what is a participle? A participle is a verb which performs the function of an adjective. And what are adjectives? Adjectives are words that describe nouns. Anything that describes a noun is an adjective. Sometimes verbs can describe nouns. And I know that sounds a little odd. It sounds hard to take in, but it's true. In the most ideal and the most basic case, verbs will be actions. But in some sentences, the verb may not be an action. It may actually be an adjective describing a noun. For example, let's look at these two sentences. Sentence number 1, the teacher is tiring me with the long chapter. In this sentence, the word tiring is a verb. Teacher is the subject. She's performing the action of tiring someone. Who is the someone that she's tiring? You, right? And what is she tiring with? The long chapter. So in this sentence, tiring becomes the verb. But let's say I change the sentence. I say, the teacher is giving a tiring lecture. Now what happened in this sentence? Teacher is still my subject. But what's my action here? The action is giving. The action is not tiring anymore. Action is giving. What is she giving? She's giving a lecture. Lecture becomes my object. Objects are nouns. We already studied that. So lecture is nothing but noun. What kind of lecture is it? Is it a fun lecture? Is it an interesting lecture? No. It's a tiring lecture. The word tiring has automatically gone from verb to adjective. Tiring is now describing lecture. It's describing what kind of noun. It's not the action. Let's take another example for participles. Let's use the word waxing. Now, waxing does not mean the procedure, the parlor procedure that women do every month. The meaning of waxing in English is different. To wax or waxing means to increase in size. So when I say that my salary has been waxing or your weight has been waxing, it means that they've been increasing. My salary has been increasing, your weight has also been increasing. So let's use this word as a verb and a participle. In the first sentence, I can say, I have been waxing in size ever since I left my diet and exercise. Meaning that since the time I stopped dieting and exercising, my size has been waxing, means it has been increasing. Here, the word waxing is a verb. I am the subject, have been waxing. This entire thing is my action. Waxing is my main verb. Have is my auxiliary or helping verb as we've studied. Now let's look at the next sentence. A waxing moon is the cause of high tides. In this sentence, moon is the subject. What is the moon causing? It's causing high tides, right? But what is the word waxing doing? I say a waxing moon means an increasing moon, a moon which is growing in size. In this sentence, the word waxing is an adjective. It's describing moon. Now, moon is my subject. Subjects are nothing but nouns. And the word waxing is describing the noun, so it's an adjective. So you see, participles are actually verbs that play the function of adjectives. Now let's talk about gerunds. Gerunds are also verbs, but they play the function of nouns in a sentence. Let's take an example. I am painting. In this sentence, I is the subject, am is the auxiliary verb, and painting is my main verb. Right? It's a complete sentence. There's no object, but that's okay because subject and verb combinations can make a complete sentence. I is the subject, am is the auxiliary verb, and painting is the main verb. I can also use the same word painting as a noun. Take the following sentence. Painting is my passion. In this sentence, painting becomes the subject. What is painting doing? It is performing the action of being my passion. So here painting is my subject. Subjects are nothing but nouns. So in this sentence, the word painting has automatically become a noun. Let's try another example. She is playing with the children in the backyard. The word she is the subject. What action is she performing? Playing. That's my main verb. Who is she playing with? The children. The children are the object. Simple sentence. But I can change the word playing and turn it into a noun. What if I say, playing the guitar is my regular day job. So what is my day job? My day job is playing the guitar. In this sentence, the word playing becomes my subject. Or actually the entire thing, playing the guitar, the whole thing is my subject and that is my noun. So you see, participles and gerunds is slightly complicated. Participles, verbs that play the function of adjectives. Gerunds, verbs that play the function of nouns. Which is why I said right at the beginning of this chapter that learning to identify the parts of speech in a sentence is complicated. The basic ones are very easy. In a very, very surface level simple sentence, you'll be able to identify everything correctly. But as we go on to advanced sentences, much longer, much complicated sentences, you'll realize that sometimes words look like one thing, but they play the function of something completely different. And in such a case, understanding the context of the sentence, the meaning of the sentence is very important to be able to correctly identify the parts of speech. If you did not understand the meaning of the sentence, playing the guitar is my regular day job, you wouldn't have figured that playing is actually the noun here and not the verb. Okay, now that we're clear on this, let's move on to transitive and intransitive verbs. This is a much simpler concept. Transitive verbs are the verbs which are followed by an object. Intransitive verbs are not followed by an object. Again, if you remember, basic sentence structure, subject and verbs are compulsory. Objects are optional in sentences. So when there is an object, a direct object, then it becomes a transitive verb, meaning that the verb or the action is transferring to a certain object. In other words, the object is receiving the verb. But if the object does not exist, it's just the subject and the verb, and you don't know who is the recipient, it becomes an intransitive verb, meaning the verb is not transferring to any object because you just don't know which object is there. Let's take simple examples of transitive and intransitive verbs. Meher spoke the truth. The driver stopped the car. In the first sentence, Meher is my subject. What did Meher do? She spoke. That's the action. Is there an object following it? Yes. The object is the word truth. What did Meher speak? She spoke the truth. So truth is the recipient of the verb, and so spoke becomes transitive. The next sentence, the driver stopped the car. The driver is my subject, stopped is my verb. What did he stop? The car. The object or the recipient of the verb is given to me in this sentence, so it becomes a transitive verb. Let's look at intransitive verbs. He ran a long distance. He is my subject. Ran is the action that he performed, so ran is my verb. But is there a recipient of the running? Is there a recipient of the action? No. All it says is he ran a long distance. Now, long distance is not exactly an object. It's just telling me more about the action of running. How far did he run? A long distance. So, in that sense, long distance actually becomes an adverb to the action ran. It's not an object. There's no object in this sentence, so ran becomes an intransitive verb. Let's try another example. The baby is sleeping. The baby is the subject, is sleeping. Is my auxiliary verb, sleeping is my main verb. Is there an object after that? No, there isn't. The sentence ends there, so this becomes an intransitory verb or an intransitive verb. Transitive and intransitive are extremely easy the minute you understand the basic concepts of sentences and the minute you understand how to identify subjects, verbs, and objects, the three most important parts of a sentence. The minute you get that, transitive and intransitive are super easy. What's tough, I'm already telling you, is modals, gerunds, and participles. Auxiliary and main verbs are also easy because you see them every day. They are a part of literally every sentence out there. Those are also easy. The toughest parts are modals. Modals only because as we move forward in this chapter, you'll realize that there are a lot of additional rules to modals, which we will discuss later. So modals get tough. Gerunds and participles are extremely tough. So you have to get into the habit of learning to identify them. Lots and lots of practice. So this is all for today. I hope you enjoyed this session. This is Manaal, your verbal faculty, signing off for now. Until we meet again, keep watching, keep learning. Adiora. Thank you.